Welcome back to another edition of Semi-Pro. Today's guest is dusT. Now, the man really needs no introduction. I figure if you clicked on this video, you already know who he is. He's a longtime commentator for the Counter-Strike scene, been here since pretty much day one. We talk about all sorts of recent scandals and drama and crazy stuff that's been happening in the scene. We also talk a little bit about his personal career trajectory and where he thinks he's going to go next. So stay tuned for that. And let's get into the interview. I'm back with another episode of Semi-Pro. I got dusT on screen here on your right. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Just surviving, or trying to in these weird times that we're in, hanging in there as best I can, put it that way.
Of course. So speaking of hanging in as best you can, I mean, initially we were going to talk about scheduling and 10 a.m. and all this other stuff, but earlier today, as of the time of recording this, we got the news that 37 coaches were receiving some sort of penalty, mostly bans, mostly long ones, for cheating and the whole scandal that's been going on there. And so as a result, I mean, before we actually started recording this, we talked briefly about just the fact that with the sheer number of games that coaches are running and the fact that sometimes this was triggered accidentally, sometimes it was intentionally, and even when it was triggered accidentally, sometimes it was used, deliberately afterwards. People are saying, well, as long as, the cards play out this way, as when life gives you lemons, you might as well look around the entire map and give information, I guess. So that seems to have been the thought process in a few cases. Obviously, the big question is, on everybody's mind now, as responses are coming in, particularly with like Robin of FaZe Clan and some other people, I think Forza from LMBT, I think, is the coach there that was, received backing from the org itself, not even just LMBT coming out and saying, hey, I'm actually innocent, or hey, this is the circumstance. It was actually the org that presented his case in that case. So there's some situations where we're not sure if ESIC is 100% on the level with what they're doing. And at that point, it kind of draws into question maybe the legitimacy of the whole thing if it were to come out that they had to walk some stuff back because they didn't do their due diligence in that thing. What do you make of the ESIC side of things as far as that goes, and what the ramifications will be, I guess, as far as the whole scene goes as a result of these investigations?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think that even if ESIC got a couple of things wrong, that's why there's an appeals process, right? At least we have an appeals process, something that Valve has never done within CSGO with any of their direct punishments. So I think that even if, sure, it will challenge their reputation if they got some things wrong. They have to kind of walk it back in an appeals process, but at least there is an appeals process, right? So I'm not necessarily too troubled with that. And I think that ESIC is at least a great foundational piece to have these types of things occur in esports, have investigations when we need them, and be able to look into, really, serious topics, and to have some type of body that can actually handle those situations. So I think all in all, it'll be a net positive to have ESIC involved. I know that a lot of people were a little bit down in the dumps on them after the whole NIP situation that happened a while back. And even I was like, wow, this is really odd. But it seems like, they're doing some good work with this coaching bug. And apparently they're also investigating like match fixing and MDL. And apparently they even mentioned something, I think on HLTV confirmed, about how they were looking into like stream-sniping and ghosting situations as well. So, it seems like they're, on the right path, doing some work that could be very positive for the scene, in the sense that it'll take care of issues that we have. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with that. And as far as, with the coaches being banned and their statements and stuff, I mean, we knew about most of these coaches already for some time. Like, I think the only big names that we didn't know about that were on this list were like Robin from FaZe, as you mentioned. I guess StarX hadn't been mentioned before until now. Ave, LMBT, and then I guess Rugga from OG. So there was a couple of names on this list that we didn't know about yet that were pretty big names, but many of the other names are names I've never really heard of, to be honest. They must be like on smaller teams that I don't really follow too much. Or, they were names that we've been knowing about for months now, and basically had already kind of come forward and discussed the issue. And it's really tough because, if you just want to take one example, Robin's statement, apparently he just muted his microphone for 16 rounds. That's not good enough, man. Like, disconnect from the server. It's really that simple. If you're not going to be able to communicate with your team anyway, then you might as well just not be in the server. It just seems like common sense to me that if you have a bug like that you wouldn't stick around in the server, especially if you've already disconnected and reconnected and still had the bug. Like, surely you should know that you shouldn't be in that server. Maybe it's true that he did mute his microphone, but you have to know how it looks to everyone else, man. There's no way of proving that you muted your microphone in that situation. So yeah, we can look at these at a case-by-case basis, and I'm sure there'll be an appeals process. But at the end of the day, if you knew about the bug, you shouldn't be in the server if you have the bug, for one. I mean, that's just bare minimum. And then for two, you should be reporting this to somebody. right? If you've been sitting on the fact that this bug occurred to you and you haven't informed anyone, whether it be a tournament organizer or Valve or, whomever, that is rough, man. Like this bug's been around for years, and ultimately the buck ends with Valve. Like there's no way that they should have had this bug in the game for so long without addressing it themselves. Like it's mind blowing to me that this bug has been around for 4 years or more, and Valve somehow didn't know about it and never put a fix in for it. But at the end of the day, also, it is your responsibility as a player or a coach or whomever in the server that if you experience something that's as game breaking as that type of bug, you should be reporting it to somebody. And that should be working its way up the food chain to have it addressed instead of just sitting on the information. That's actually the worst part of it to me, is not actually using it, but knowing about it and not telling anyone so that it can persist for years. That's just so uncalled for, in my opinion.
Well, we do know the way that Valve approaches resolving any issues in the scene usually involves a journalist like Richard Lewis dragging them kicking and screaming towards whatever the source of the malfeasance is. So I guess I can't say that I'm personally surprised that it took them so long to even fix the bug, which only happened, I think, last month after the publication of all of the initial reports came in. But on top of that, just because it doesn't surprise you doesn't mean that it doesn't disappoint you, I guess. So I can definitely see where a lot of people would lay the responsibility at Valve's doorstep there. And I personally think it is rather justified. I think when you look at it from the perspective of the coaches themselves, who maybe don't know all of the circumstances surrounding it, maybe only did get it once or twice. And in situations like what Robin elucidated in the later stages of his twitlonger or of his statement, he said that the second time that he had triggered the bug accidentally, when he disconnected and reconnected, it fixed itself. So that it's quite possible that could have happened to more coaches than it happened where it was not resolvable in some way and it was permanent and they were stuck that way. So what I'm getting at here is, given the fact that some coaches maybe don't communicate to other coaches who know about this, maybe it was kept secret from, only shared in certain circles, if it was shared at all by people who found it. And given the erratic nature of the initial triggering of the bug, I think it's fair to say that pretty much the only people who could have known about it, besides the people who were already abusing it, who had figured out a way to trigger it manually, that would have been Valve. And you have to wonder where they were in the middle of this. And as good as it is to have ESIC, at least to have some body out there, some governing body in some sense, being able to, be empowered by the tournament organizers and by the players and the teams who will follow through with whatever statements they put out and whatever penalties they dole out. In that particular respect, it is good to have ESIC, despite the fact that we don't have, an actual, I wouldn't say an authoritative standpoint from Valve, but the idea that this is something where it's in the game. The distinction is not really behavior in the same sense, because it's not like you're installing software that's changing something around them to trigger it. It's not like you're installing a hack or something like an aimbot. That would be much more unforgivable on the individual who did it. It's still not forgivable in this particular sense, but you have to wonder where Valve was specifically. Do you think this will actually result in a change in how Valve, sort of approaches their scene, or do you think it's just more of the same that we've been seeing for years now?
Man, if we got talking about Valve, we could run the rest of this podcast just talking about Valve, man. So I'm going to try to be as concise as I can, because I have very ill feelings towards how Valve handles CSGO, and I have for quite some time. I try to give them benefit of the doubt and even defend them at times when people in the community were like really, really harsh against them in certain situations, whether it be like weapon balancing or how they handle the bans for the match fixing players, way back when with like Dazed and AZK and Swag and all those guys. I've tried to, take a step back and be patient and, kind of understand that, they're very hands off. And in some ways that's been a benefit to our community that they've been hands off and not so, governing over the game and controlling like, maybe other esports are, because that each way that a developer handles their game has its pros and cons, whether it's, hands off or really, really hands on. Right. But I do think that Valve is way too extreme on the hands off end. But then when they do come in, they just fuck shit up. Like it's unbelievable how they can be so hands off, but then the moments that they do participate in our process, they come in with just such heavy hands and do things that are just far too dramatic, in my opinion. Like, listen, I don't even like, you have to be pretty mental if you think that the way that those match fixers were punished years ago was fair. That was a totally draconian punishment to permanently ban them from the game. I think most people think that now, especially now that we've been able to sit back and look at that in hindsight for so many years. I think that most people are on the same page that, yeah, they deserve to be punished, maybe for, 1, 2, 3 years, whatever you want it to be. But the fact that they were permanently barred from the game, essentially, when it comes to majors, which really limited their career options in CSGO, was just overly draconian. And I mean, again, they've been slow on weapon balancing issues multiple times throughout CSGO's lifetime, whether it be like the CZ or the Tech 9 or other situations. They have just been, really asleep at the wheel, in my opinion, when it comes to balancing in those situations. And I'm going to tell you now, if Valve comes out and bans coaching, it's going to be hell, man, because that's whenever you're fucking with people's careers and you're really just harming the scene. I get that this coaching situation looks bad, and I get that a lot of these coaches are to blame, and I get that a lot of people have the feeling that they wouldn't even really blame Valve at this point because they had so much ammunition to get rid of coaching because they didn't really want it in the first place. They kind of got strong-armed into it because the community really, really wanted it. And so they came in and said, well, fine, we'll let you have it, but we're definitely going to limit its impact as much as we can, with the rules that they came out with, like the 4 timeouts and not talking between rounds and all that good stuff. So to be fair, the community's done a pretty bad job in the sense that they've given Valve a lot of ammunition and a lot of reason to get rid of coaching. But at the end of the day, I'm hoping that these ESIC punishments will be enough, and Valve will kind of sit back and just allow the scene to continue on as it has been when it comes to coaching, because I think that coaching, as we've seen in traditional sports and other esports, is a vital part of the scene. And I would hate to see it just barred because these people, ruin it for everyone because they decided to, exploit something. But again, like I said earlier, it comes back to Valve. This is your fault. You had this bug in the game, right? Yeah, you can definitely blame people for abusing it and for not informing you about it and all that stuff. That's totally fair. But at the end of the day, as you were kind of mentioning, it's not as if they used some third-party software or some cheat or something like that. No, they did something that was broken in your game that you're responsible for. So I think Valve deserves blame here too, as far as not, being up to snuff with their game and making sure that things like this don't persist, on their technical side. I'll wait and reserve judgment until we see what Valve does with coaching going forward. But I mean, if they really do bar it, I mean, my goodness, man, it's just going to be draconian punishments all over again, just like they did with the match fixers. Honestly, I just had this feeling that the people who are working on CSGO are at worst incompetent and at best just, aren't passionate about the game anymore. It just seems like, they just, I'm just really disappointed with how they've handled CSGO over the years, to be honest with you. But I don't want to go too much further than that because I feel like I just rant forever if I did.
Well, just one follow-up question on the side of Valve then, because when I was first getting into the game and I realized how much like my home game of StarCraft 1, the game was essentially in some ways attenuated in terms of its balance through custom maps or, player-made maps, in some particular cases, user-made maps, as well as, of course, official maps that in some cases were adopted from earlier versions of the game. When I realized that, my first thought was, oh, great. In Brood War, you get map seasons and different maps will come into the ladder at the active pool at different times. And I thought that was a really interesting way to shake things up without needing to touch the game balance at all. And since you can't really trust game developers in the modern day and age to balance a game for the competitive side as well as for the casual side, maybe it makes the most sense to just have a map pool and have that change every now and then. But as I became more learned in the scene, I realized how infrequently those changes were. And this is just obviously one particular case where they could obviously shake up the scene quite well. The reason I share that anecdote is this is one particular example that illustrates how Valve, like you say, in many people's minds has been asleep at the wheel or very slow to react. There's just this mammoth battleship that takes forever to steer, even though their company culture has purportedly been very free and liberating. Maybe it's just the fact that nobody's interested in the game. That certainly has been alleged in the past by some people. So my question then would be, if you first told me when I was initially getting into the game and learning about the developer and their history, their track record, that at some point in the future, 37 coaches in various levels of professional play will be banned for a bug abuse, I would have thought, wow, well, the developer better get their shit together and make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again and pay more attention to how their game interacts with the professional scene. Now that has happened, do you think that Valve will actually be more attentive in a positive way and try to, nip any additional issues that we could be aware of or could not be aware of in the bud before they result in some sort of ESIC related investigation? Or do you think in this particular context, Valve is just happy to wait until the situation boils up and becomes unavoidable, and then slap a very draconian or perhaps reductive resolution onto the problem? Or do you think there's some sort of in-between answer there as far as how Valve will handle such situations should they arise in the future?
To be honest, man, I have a pretty pessimistic view of like Valve going forward, just because of what I've seen over the last, 8 years that I've been involved in this game. I just feel like the track record's not really there for me to believe that Valve is going to somehow shift their mentality on how often they get involved or how deeply they get involved in these types of situations. Obviously, at the end of the day, when it comes to bugs like this coaching bug, there's only so much that you can do as a developer until a bug gets reported to you by users. You're kind of relying on your user base to report things to you. And unfortunately, when it comes to coaching, there's only a select group of people who ever even interact with that feature in the game. So you're really relying on those people to come forward and report bugs to you. So part of it's on Valve for having crappy code, but another part of it is coaches interacting with the game. Again, only a very small population even interact with that feature to be able to come forward and report things. And, like you said earlier, maybe some people only encounter it once and they don't even realize it is reproducible. So there's a lot on that. But to get away from the coaching bug and just look at Valve at large, again, there's just too bad of a track record, in my opinion. You look at the CZ, the Tech 9, how broken those guns were and for how long they were broken. You look at the whole Krieg meta and AUG meta and how long those guns were broken for. When it comes to balancing, Valve is very much asleep at the wheel most of the time. They really just kind of sit back and collect data, but they do it for ages and they don't really act on anything. And then, when it comes to the map pool, that's another situation where very rarely do we see changes. Like one map gets rotated out every year or so. And we have the sad thing is we have all these maps that most people have never seen before that come from previous versions of Counter-Strike. So for a lot of the community, they would be brand new because most people have never seen it because maybe CSGO is their first Counter-Strike. So it's not as if it would take much to just go and get some of these maps back, like a Tuscan, like a Contra, like a Fire, whatever. And then maybe remake them as you need to fit the game as far as balancing goes. Moses had that whole idea of just mess around with the bomb sites a little bit, and restructure them, change boxes or, whatever. I think that's actually a pretty good idea where you don't have to do a lot of work, but you can still enact a lot of change to keep the game fresh on some of these maps we compete on. Maybe we should be rotating 2 or 3 maps out after every major. That way there's more variety, but at the same time, you give teams plenty of time to adapt rather than, throwing curveballs in rapidly and kind of messing everything up. But at the end of the day, I don't hold my breath on Valve changing the way that they handle things because they've been doing the same thing with CSGO since its conception. Would I like Valve to be more involved? Yeah, sure. I'd like them to be quicker with how they patch, balance issues. I'd like them to, work with the map pool a little bit more. I'd like them to communicate with the community a little bit more, or have some type of liaison between the community and Valve. I would like, Valve to change how they staff people or staff games. Get people who want to work on Counter-Strike. Stop letting people just freely float around and let them work on whatever they want because we don't have enough people who want to work on Counter-Strike apparently. So yeah, I don't know. That is a big can of worms.
Certainly. And another can of worms I'd like to open is actually related to the history of the game in some ways, going back all the way to 1.6, 1.3, the earlier versions. I know you've been watching the game for a while, following the scene. And what I wanted to ask you about was related to the coaching ban a little bit more. And it was certainly related to the fact that apparently some of these offenses, some of these bug abuses, intentional or otherwise, are dating all the way back to, in some cases, 2015, some cases earlier. So there's a ton of information out there that now indicates that the history that actually propped up the game and the scene and the legends and all of that. For example, the the narrative that I've heard time and time again regarding old Navi before the coach changes even came in from Valve was that with Sterix as the IGL coach, we would have a really dominant Navi team or a really heavy contender. But now it comes out that he was implicated in bug abuse in this particular case. And to the extent that he was implicated, to the extent that they have evidence for that, doesn't really matter, because just the fact that they found 1 or 2 cases means that you have to call it a lot more into question, whereas previously you didn't have to. So in your opinion, what does this actually do to the overall overarching history that brings us to where we are today in terms of narratives and in terms of the scene's stability and where the teams came from, essentially?
Yeah, that's tough because, like you said, unless you know how many offenses took place and things of that nature and exactly when they took place, then it would be really hard to kind of go back and retcon history, so to speak, based on the evidence that we have. So it would really depend on how detailed the evidence is, and if you could really just go back and pinpoint particular moments where it was used and how often it was used and how much it impacted certain results. I think that the great thing is that this likely never took place on LAN, at least from what I can tell. And LAN is essentially what we look to 90% of the time to kind of, draw a team's stature, so to speak, like what we use to base their accomplishments and their shortcomings. Like we judge teams essentially on the biggest levels of competition, which are on LAN. So if it is indeed true that the coaching bug never really took place on the LAN environment, then, I don't think that it'll necessarily ruin too many team reputations or really change what we think about teams and how they've been ranked throughout the history of Counter-Strike. But, it certainly is true that maybe the way you qualified for the event comes under question now all of a sudden, because maybe you used it in like a particularly important qualifier that could, have made or break your team at that particular moment in time. So I definitely think that it'll certainly cause a lot of people to question, what they originally thought. I know for me, the number is mind blowing. The fact that 37 people got implicated in this is crazy to me. I can't believe that many people in our scene abused the bug. Now, granted, of those 37, maybe certain ones were accidents. Maybe certain ones were truly, wow, I never encountered this before. I'm not sure how to handle this. What do I do? I'm confused. I can see it from that perspective. So maybe the number like leaps off the page and jumps at you. But maybe if you dig through it with the fine tooth comb, you'll find that maybe truly only 10 or so people like really understood what was happening and looked to abuse it on a consistent basis. So maybe it's not as severe as the initial number indicates. But yeah, sure, I think it'll definitely make people a little bit more weary of what they think about some of these online results, which is compounded by the fact that we're in an online era that we're basically forced into by COVID. And it makes things even more complicated at that point because we're having to rely on online CS right now because that's all that we've got. Meanwhile, we're learning about, the thing is we already knew about many of the shortcomings of online CS, because that's just unfortunately how it works. Like when it comes to like ping differences or how the game operates online versus how it operates on LAN with like peeker's advantage and different things like that. So there are certain shortcomings that we just have to accept because that is just the way it is with online infrastructure and with today's technology and things of that nature. But then now it calls into question all these other issues like the coaching bug or, like ghosting, like stream sniping, all these different factors that aren't really a concern in the game's most competitive environment, which is the LAN environment, which unfortunately we can't do right now. So yeah, I definitely think that it's going to maybe put a bad taste in people's mouths about online CS and about Counter-Strike in general. But I'm hoping that it's something that we can put to rest once we deal out these punishments, once these investigations come to a close. We can end that chapter and we can, look forward to hopefully getting back to LAN maybe at some point next year or something, and things will kind of go back to normal. That's my hope, at least.
One of the things that also this whole conversation makes me think about is the fact that normally when you have some sort of internal drama that feels very much endemic to the scene, or drama might be too reduction a word in this particular case, but when you have a certain event that happens that really is specific to a particular game's scene, I feel like oftentimes it usually doesn't spill out into the mainstream media that occasionally will report in usually a reductionist way on video games, on esports. This is a case where just based on the number, just based on some of the things that pop out at you immediately without knowing the context and without potentially knowing like even how to get the context in the first place, you might be encouraged to think that this would be a salacious headline or a story about, like 37 coaches implicated in latest ruling on coach banning and or coach cheating. And in a situation like that, I have to wonder if this will further the divide between Counter-Strike, which already has some issues securing, I guess you could even, I don't even know if you could call it mainstream appeal, but the idea that obviously it's a game that's notoriously hard to find sponsors for due to the verbiage of the teams. And in many respects, it's always been that weird outsider factor because it has that last vestige of hardcore FPS gameplay that you see in the high level of stuff, generally speaking. So the idea that now all of a sudden, not only do we have to worry about how we proceed as a scene, we have to somehow scramble to figure out a way to not necessarily spin it deceptively, but to dispel any myths that might come out of salacious headlines from the mainstream media. It makes me feel like maybe this jeopardizes the scene more than people think. What's your take on essentially how we will get out of the situation that we're in beyond the stuff that's deliberately endemic to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a tough one because I feel one of the issues that we have in CSGO is that we have betting, and we have a long history of betting, whether it was like CSGO Lounge back in the day with skins and then how it's evolved into more legitimate forms of betting. A lot of other esports don't have that problem, right? Like I don't even know what other esports have betting like we have in CSGO. So the point is when you have something like betting involved in your scene, there's always going to be a certain group of people who are tempted to exploit that, for gain, whether that be, match fixing or whether that be there's more on the line, whatever the case may be. Also, one of the other things that CSGO has that people don't have is we have things like ESIC that other esports don't even have. So for all we know, there's plenty of issues going on in other esports, but none of it's really being investigated. Like we have a strong group of investigative journalists that work in our scene, whether it be Richard Lewis or whether it be DK or whether it be Jacob Wolf back in the day, who I think probably still dabbles in Counter-Strike some if he needs to. And then there's plenty of more people I could point to that have that investigative journalism to them that really work strongly in our scene. And then we have got bodies like ESIC who are investigating things now. Other esports don't really have that infrastructure or have those levels of investigative journalists. Most people in other games are more like feature people or interviewers or something like that. So I do wonder how much stuff goes on in other esports that just never get brought to light because they don't have the same infrastructure that we have as far as investigative bodies or investigative journalists that explore those topics. But at the end, I guess with Counter-Strike, the game has such a long past. Right. I mean, the game's been around for 20 plus years at this point. Not many other games can claim that, other than maybe like StarCraft. And obviously the original Dota has been around for a really long time. And there's a couple other games you could point to that have pretty rich histories. But ours, I feel like, is one of the longest histories in esports. And so with that in mind, as long as we've persisted, I can't see Counter-Strike withering away over something like this. I think that Counter-Strike will still have a very hopefully long future, maybe not CSGO, maybe a few years from now, we have to look at a different version of the game or something like that. But I think that Counter-Strike, that brand, will persist. I mean, I just feel like it's a game that hasn't aged in the sense that it's a game mode and a format that is still very popular with a large group of people, whether it be from a spectating perspective or from an actual player perspective. So I think that sure, in the short term, this looks really bad. I'm sure there will be some of those sensationalist headlines that you're talking about. I'm sure that, there's going to be a lot of, kind of having to sit down and reflect, how we handle things and what we look for and how we treat people and how we treat, the competition in our game. But I can't see it knocking CSGO out of like being a top esport. I can't see it ruining the Counter-Strike brand on a permanent basis, long term. So I like to be hopeful in the sense that I think Counter-Strike has so many positives going for it that while this does look really bad, and it is bad that this many people that work in our scene have done something naughty, I'm hoping that it's something that we can investigate, we can punish. And I think now we have a system in place long term with organizations like ESIC to be able to, kind of safeguard our game going forward when future issues like this come up. And we already have systems in place to handle it. And hopefully people will learn from this that, okay, now there are institutions in place that will find us out if we do something that we shouldn't be doing. And hopefully it'll kind of help police our game going forward long term. So while it's nasty now and it sucks, I think that the long-term thing that people need to be thinking is we're putting things in place now that'll protect our game going forward. Something that other esports don't quite have yet.
Well, one of the things that is, I guess, one of the main reasons why we've been seeing more mainstream reporting on Counter-Strike, on esports in general, is the fact that at the beginning of the lockdowns that happened, it was pretty much one of the only ways that you could get any sports-like entertainment, and people who previously were not inculcated into Counter-Strike or esports more broadly were coming in and looking on Twitch TV and looking on all of these platforms and finding ways to enjoy a different kind of sports-like competition. And in that sense, I think it's, a positive headline abound in that sense for esports, and hopefully with the added attention comes enough people who are interested in looking at the positive side of this and realizing, well, not only do these competitive games have a lot to offer, whereas previously we had no idea about, but they also, even in some of them, have entire bodies that are willing to investigate, and groups of journalists who are willing to investigate, like you're saying. So with any luck, we'll have something a bit more positive on the back end of this, where people will increase the respect of the scene broadly, despite the fact that we've faltered in this particular respect as a community. We've shown that we can correct it, which not every sport generally can do or can demonstrate. So one of the other things that is related to, of course, the lockdowns is the fact that we are in an online era. That's something that you mentioned earlier. And one of the things I wanted to quiz you on is essentially your take on the oversaturation, or if there is in fact oversaturation when it comes to online games. One of the things that has been happening a lot lately is the fact that tournaments seem to be going on for much longer with many more games in them, despite the prize pool increases. Well, the prize pool is not increasing, I guess. The general flair of the tournaments have withered away, and a lot of it has felt very similar to a lot of spectators. And the general consensus is that we seem to be sort of stuck in a proverbial rut, where we're watching the same teams play the same games on the same maps in what feels like the same tournaments, even if it isn't actually the same tournaments. So a lot of the same broadcasters as well, because there's less of a reason in most TOs' minds, it seems, to actually swap out the broadcast talent and have a diverse voice cast there for the audience. What's your take on how tournament organizers and how broadcast talent have fared in the last few months, and where you think that puts the scene more broadly speaking?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you have to think about is that, we're forced in this online era, right? I mean, we don't have a choice. And I get that TOs need to still be able to operate in this environment, which means they need to be able to host tournaments online, which for them are cheaper to run than a LAN, obviously. But they still want to put on a show because they still need to put out broadcasting hours to satisfy sponsorship deals and to bring in more sponsorship deals and to stay afloat and to, be a business, like I get it. But yeah, some of these formats have been ridiculously drawn out and extended in situations that don't seem fair. Like there's no way that a tournament should be lasting 3 weeks or something like that. Like that is kind of absurd. At that point, you're bordering on a league, and how long a league would last when you're having some of these tournaments last for that long. Also, I mean, some formats are even adding matches I've never even seen before. Like, not to just call out this tournament, but I don't even know if this is accurate or not, but I was looking at the DreamHack Fall event, and not only did they have an upper bracket and lower bracket in the playoffs, which is great, a double elimination bracket, I'm totally down for that, but they also have like a 9th and 10th place match, a 7th place match, a 5th place match. Like, what is that? Like what are these extra matches for out of nowhere, just to determine like a small bit of prize money difference? I don't know if that's 100% accurate. That's just what I saw on like the Wikipedia for CSGO for the tournament. So yeah, I think there's definitely a situation where people are extending things a little bit too long. And maybe there is a little bit too much going on at once, and it's kind of like one group dominating the field while other groups can't even get involved. But man, it's just so tough because it's a special situation, this COVID spot that we're in right now. So I hesitate to like argue too strongly in one direction or another. Oversaturation as a general topic has been something that we've argued back and forth on many different times throughout CSGO's history, with the calendar being, particularly full and players fighting for, set player breaks, which they only just recently got this last year, basically. How the major can sometimes come in And like there's just so many things that we've worked on over time. Like we finally have Valve pre-announcing majors so that way everyone else can plan their calendar around them. We finally have 2 set organized player breaks. It took forever for us to get to that point. So we finally are starting to put some things in place that kind of break up the scene a bit and allow people to operate better. But at the end of the day, this COVID situation is very unique, and I do feel like some tournaments are feeling pressured to try to do as much as they can in this COVID environment, as far as, doing as much online stuff as they can to stay afloat and to keep their brand out there and to satisfy whatever sponsorship deals that they have and to build on it. So, it's hard for me to really critique it either way. I'm not like super business or savvy myself, so it's hard for me to argue from that point of view. But yeah, I definitely think that part of it is the fact that some of these tournaments, their formats are just a little bit too strenuous for the amount of prize money that's being given out. But I also think that to some degree, it's on the teams choosing what you want to participate in. Like if you're feeling burnt out, then maybe you skip a tournament. I get that they have certain things they have to follow based on maybe contracts that they signed. Yeah, they have obligations that they have to fulfill, in the sense that sometimes you can't skip a tournament because then you lose points, or you might get punished in some kind of way on future invites, or whatever the case may be. With some of the people that sign that deal with the ESL. But yeah, I don't know. I wish that we could come to some type of happy medium. But again, this is what happens when you have a completely open circuit where the developer's hands off on how the scene operates. Right. This is one of the cons of it, is that you're going to have, everyone competing against each other for calendar space, for prestige, for, what teams participating in their event. And it gets really scrappy because, everyone wants a piece of the pie and they want to guard their piece of the pie and maybe grab some more pie. And, it's tough, but it's how the scene's been on and off its entire lifetime. Right. I mean, we've had these oversaturation conversations multiple times throughout the years. And it kind of always ends the same way, where it kind of eventually maybe slows down a little bit. Everyone kind of forgets about it, and then we go on our merry way. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is, I guess is the point I'm trying to get at. I don't know if it comes down to teams being more selective on what events they participate in. I don't know if it's putting pressure on TOs to change up their formats. It's really hard to say what the correct solution is.
One of the things that I've seen argued in the past before the lockdown hit and before the RMR schedule took over was that, like you're saying, teams could just bow out of a specific tournament, decline an invitation, or just be a bit more staunch with how they actually pick certain events in their calendar. And while I sympathize with that argument and agree with it, generally speaking, one of the things that I've noticed lately is, before Valve confirmed that there was no major, people were still under the impression that every one of these RMR tournaments counted. And without necessarily retreading too much on the Valve being a little asleep at the wheel when it comes to the scheduling and all of this stuff with their involvement in the esports scene, I did want to ask about essentially what the RMR system has resulted in, because I would ask, what do you think could have been done better, or what do you think could have been done differently to avoid some of the issues? But as far as I can tell, most people have simply said they should have canceled the major immediately, or at least if they had not canceled the major immediately, they shouldn't have implemented this RMR system in such a half-baked manner, where now teams can't even make roster changes for, I think it was upwards of 6 or 7 months before the confirmation. Might have been a little bit less than that, but bottom line is that it doesn't seem to have benefited the scene as much as it restricted player obligations to very specific tournaments that have that RMR stamp of approval. Many of them were ESL tournaments, and many of them did go on for a long time, like we're talking about. So is this a particularly unique case, not just because of the pandemic and the lockdowns, but also because of Valve's influence? Or would you say that this is actually more like what you think the future of Counter-Strike's scenes will look like?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's a net benefit to implement some type of RMR system or some type of point system to determine team rankings for majors, rather than relying on the classic system that we had in the past, where there's the legends, and because the majors were just too spaced apart and too many things would change between majors for you to just give teams automatic burst to the top 16 based on their previous major performance. So I think that it's a net benefit for competitive integrity and for a true picture of the scene to have a points type system to determine where teams are at, and then how you dish out invites for the legends and challenger stages and all that good stuff. I think that in the long term, this is going to be great. I actually really like this pivot from Valve to have some type of, system where the circuit itself provides you the evidence you need to base invitations and qualifier slots and things of that nature, rather than just relying on the previous major. And that's your only criteria, other than like online qualifiers and such to get you into minors and whatnot. So I think all in all, the RMR system will be great, but it probably will need to be tweaked on how points are given and, how many points are given and what tournament means the most. And, like I'm sure that we'll have to tweak things to find the perfect way to implement the RMR system. But yeah, the issue does become that I feel like we should have waited on implementing the system. And I feel like the major definitely should have been, canceled way sooner than it was. I mean, they basically waited until like 2 months before the major to cancel the major. And surely they had to have known that it probably wasn't going to fly much longer ago than when they decided to cancel it. But that always is difficult too, because I've heard in certain situations with certain TOs that even when they know for sure that it's not going to go ahead, they can't cancel it earlier because of like their contracts with the venues and stuff, that they have to like wait to a certain point to where like something else cancels it, like the state government or city government or whatever. That way they don't like lose their money, like their deposit on the venue. And like there's like little things like that behind the scenes that some people don't really realize is going on, that prevents people from announcing sooner that they have to cancel something just based on contracts and things of that nature, like from a legal standpoint, I guess. So I'm not sure if that was a part of the reason why they waited so long to announce this major being canceled, or if they truly were just optimistic that the situation would change and that things would start opening up more and that they could still go ahead. Because obviously it's a bad look to not be able to run a major for essentially an entire year. Like that is a tough pill to swallow. And so I imagine that part of them was just really hoping they could push forward and go ahead. So yeah, I do think that this particular moment, it has not been handled well, but I do think that this whole concept of an RMR system in the long term, once things go back to normal and once that system gets perfected, I think will be a much better system than what we've had in the past for majors, and I think it'll be a net benefit for the scene.
Speaking of net benefits for the scene, my next question is more slated around localized North American stuff. Obviously, it's been a while since we've seen integrated play, and I wanted to ask a little bit about something that's been on my mind as I've seen more and more North American teams either bow out of certain operations entirely, or there's rumors that, for example, EG is looking to get out of Counter-Strike. Not sure if those have been validated by anybody credible yet, but it's been circulating for long enough that it seems to just have passed some sort of muster, just based on the fact that, usually those rumors that are not able to be substantiated tend to fly. They say hi and then they say bye in basically the same breath. So for the most part, they are short-lived, particularly in a scene that's as fast-moving as ours, where you can tweet about 10 a.m. and get on the front page of Reddit for a couple of days. So for the most part, it seems like rumors like that seem to be at least a safer bet than what they were before. And my question then is, especially in light of the recent championship win by Furia, where the final was Furia versus 100 Thieves, neither of which are actually North American by residence. The question has to be asked: Do you have a particular pessimistic view or any sort of insight as to what you think the rest of the North American scene is going to look like by the end of this year, by the early 2021? Some people have already started saying that maybe North America just flat out doesn't have a tier 1 scene by the end of the year, just based on the fact that so many orgs are bowing out. Obviously, Valorant is a big pull for some of them. What's your take on that overall?
I mean, I think that the top of our scene will pretty much remain the same. Like, it's still going to be Liquid, EG, and then obviously Furia, has been really strong throughout this online era, and in the past has been strong, right? I mean, I think they've had their moments of falling off, but I think that that core of players has classically been pretty good and could even get big results at elite tournaments. So, I think that that's a pretty strong three that we have the Americas region right now, is Furia, EG, and Team Liquid. And again, you have to take everything with a grain of salt because it's online. What happens once we get to LAN? Then what changes, right? I know Liquid was having their struggles on LAN before we went to the online era anyway, and it turned into a roster change eventually for them during the online era. I know EG had their hiccups, where they were really strong at one point in 2019, but then kind of fall off towards the end. So don't get me wrong. I know that each of these teams have had their issues, but I think that they still will be three really strong teams once we get back to normal. I really do think that, EG, Liquid, Furia, once they maybe make their adjustments and see where they're at on LAN and, get more time with their new players and new coaches and things of that nature, I think that those three teams could still be top 10 teams in the world, or certainly at least competing for slots in the top 10. So I think that that's fine. I think the bigger issue within the Americas overall is like what happens below that. right? Because I feel like this is the first time in a long time that we haven't had like a really, really strong tier 2 scene in the Americas, right? Like Made in Brazil's dead, in my opinion. Like that's just gone. So forget about Made in Brazil for now until we figure out what the hell is going on with that organization, with that roster, with those players. Just put them to the side, right? The only other viable teams right now, since we like Cloud9's essentially going mostly European, it doesn't even have a full roster yet. You pretty much have like Henge and Chaos. That's pretty much it once you get past Liquid, EG, and Furia. And Henge right now doesn't even have a solid fifth, right? Because of the whole DAP stepping down situation, which is rather odd to me. So yeah, I mean, you have a couple of teams below the top 3 that are pretty good and have some pretty good players. But then after that, man, I mean, it really spirals down really fast. I don't mean to like shit on people like Triumph or, different things like that. But bro, Mythic is ranked 12th in the Americas right now. And they're essentially a stream team. That's no offense to Flom and Mythic, but come on, man. How is that possible? And it really gives me a very pessimistic view on like this idea of upcoming talent in the NA scene. Because it is true that a lot of it is going the way of Valorant. Put it this way. Wardell, who's like one of the best players in Valorant right now over on TSM as like their jet opper, that guy, if he would have stuck around CSGO, would have easily been a target for Liquid during this whole roster change situation with Nitro, going over to Valorant. And so there's definitely some big talents that went the way of Valorant, and we've lost them now. So they're not going to funnel up to the top of the America scene for the long term for CSGO. And honestly, I'm not sure of any like young prospects out there. Like, yeah, you have, the old Cloud9 guys like Floppy and OC and some of those guys that are definitely talented and definitely could, eventually work their way up the ladder. I think those are definitely talents that we have in our scene that will come up. But then after that, it's a pretty huge drop off. Like a lot of the other names are names that have been seasoned MDL players and have never really been able to take a step up to the pro level. And I'm not sure if they ever will. And if they ever do, if they'll actually be of quality to build up some more NA teams that are going to be strong. It just seems like the way the scene is right now, a lot of people are either stepping away from CSGO, not taking it seriously. They're experimenting with Valorant. So yeah, I do wonder about like the bottom of our scene. I think the top is still strong. Like this top 3 or 4 teams that we have in the region are still going to be internationally competitive. But the bottom of our scene and like the tier 2, so to speak, of the Americas, that is an area that I'm really concerned with. But I'll just have to see how league play goes and how LAN play goes once things start getting back to normal next year, hopefully. But even that's a big ask, right? Who knows what's going to happen next year? I mean, who knows how long this scenario we're in is going to last? But yeah, I do have my concerns about, the upcoming talent in our scene.
Well, one of the organizational side of things that I've been worried about is just the sheer number of NA-based orgs that are outsourcing talent either partially or in full from other regions. I mean, obviously 100 Thieves is an example where they're an LA-based org as far as I know, but they're obviously they're primarily from Australia, and the ANZ region, generally speaking, is where they source their players. Then you go into even the lower tier teams like Contact that are over in Flashpoint. That is, for all intents and purposes, a North American org that secured entirely European players initially when they entered Flashpoint 1. There's, of course, Cloud9 and Complexity. Complexity, obviously, a long time ago went for mostly European and is now, I think, only Rush is the last NA resident there on that team now that they have a stand-in in Natusafix. So we go away from that. We go to Cloud9. I think 3/5 of their confirmed roster are all European. There's 2 Brits and Woxic. So the question then has to become, is there a lack of investable talent, like a talent that's worth the investment? Do you think that maybe a bigger club will start to look at the rosters of Chaos, of XC9, which obviously has the South African players as well as the North American players, and then maybe in theory like Triumph further down the line, that sort of thing? Do you think that that's the future for that sort of thing? Or do you think that maybe there's just not that much that companies or corporations or these teams see as proper investments worth taking a risk on?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if like more talent will eventually funnel up like over time. Maybe there's some players and teams out there that I'm just not aware of that will eventually kind of present themselves as being worthy of taking that next step up in their careers. But again, like once you get past, like the top teams and like Henge and Chaos and the old Cloud9 players, and you start getting deeper into the NA scene, I mean, there's a couple of players out there that stick out to me. Like I know Moose has always been like a pretty good player in his E United days, but I'm not sure what his form is now. were kind of hyping up that junior guy from Triumph at different points in time. There's like Wrath on that Secret Club team that some people have hyped up at different points in time. And there's a couple other names here and there. But again, a lot of the talent that I did think of as being talent that could make its way up, like a Dapper or a Wardell or some of these other players are now over in Valorant. And, some other players have just kind of been consistently sitting in the same spot and kind of that, tier 2 level, have never really shown you evidence that they're ready to take that next step up. A lot of the teams that were below, Chaos, Gen G are kind of breaking apart and going their separate ways or going to Valorant or what have you. Like look at, for example, some of the players over in Valorant that play on, what team is it? It's like the French Canadian team in Valorant. I think it's Gen G in Valorant, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Gen G, with people like Gimond and all those guys. So definitely, some of our talents go in that direction. And I'm sure eventually there will be some names that come up that we see like an MDL or maybe even in the ESL Pro League or something where you're like, okay, like here's the next group of guys. Maybe that will happen. But right now I couldn't put my finger on any of them. And so I do kind of wonder about, where our scene is headed in the long term, outside of like our top 3 or 4 teams.
Another sort of knock-on effect of not only the coaching ban, but also the recent exodus of Henge and Moses to positions amongst teams. If you go back far enough, you can see YNK obviously did the same thing. Now we've got an exodus of players from CSGO to Valorant in mostly the tier 2 NA scene, it seems, or the tier 3 NA scene. This leaves quite a big vacuum where, in theory, the players who previously might not get a chance or might not get as good of a chance to prove themselves now have pretty much open season to come on and show us what they can do because of the sheer dearth of talent that we have now, as opposed to a couple months ago or a year ago. And that extends to players, that extends to coaches now, presumably, at least in the European scene, a little bit more so than the North American scene. And of course, it extends to, broadcasters and stuff. So the question then becomes, assuming NA can present that sort of side of things where it's a bit more of a hopeful perspective that the North American region as a body can produce talent to fill the vacancies, they could sort of get that baptism of fire, that the trial by fire that they will undoubtedly have to have just based on the people who are still remaining are higher tier and more veteran status in that sense. Do you think that there's still a sufficient influx in other areas like coaching or like maybe in-game leading that's more specific than just players, even like broadcast talent? Do you think that there's still situations like that where you would see a reasonable sort of approach for new talent to come in? Or do you think that the organizational support for that has dwindled, as well as the fact that the actual talent themselves have dwindled?
Yeah, when it comes to like coaching and game leading, I just don't have any information in those areas, so I couldn't really tell you if eventually people will start funneling up. Like I know that there's people interested in coaching, and I'm sure as more and more players decide to step away from playing, maybe you'll see them take opportunities to try it at coaching. And so that will always be a system that will kind of operate similarly to how it has in the past, I guess, with like players or maybe eventually like casters or analysts or whatever deciding they want to do something different, and then they approach coaching and kind of see if it's for them or not. As what happened with like a Dren, as what's happening with Moses now, as what's happened with Henry G, with the managerial role he has at Cloud9. So I'm sure you'll see some of that, going forward. I think that's just kind of the natural progression sometimes for certain players and people who are more analytical to kind of, at least have a thought exercise on whether they would want to do that and then kind of go that way. When it comes to in-game leading, that's always hard to judge because unlike, other things that you can actually watch in a demo or see in stats, you can't really know how someone operates as an IGL. And that's always been the struggle with trying to find new in-game leaders, is a lot of the time it just turns into players trying the role from other roles and experimenting with it, and they either fit it or they don't. And I'm not really sure how to approach the in-game leader problem because, again, it's harder to judge, right? I mean, you can watch a demo and see, oh, this team plays pretty good Counter-Strike. They seem to have some pretty good strats, but you don't know how much of that is one guy calling the shots or how much of that is multiple players pitching in a more looser system. So you have to do like a lot of player interviews probably to kind of try to figure that out. And I don't know, that's always been a difficult one for NA, and I'm not sure what the solution to that would ever really be. When it comes to broadcast talent, seems to me like it's still just going to be the same people that you've been seeing continue to keep working. I haven't really seen a window of opportunity for new people to really step in. Maybe in like smaller tournaments, where some of the bigger name talent aren't interested, or those events don't have the budget to hire those types of people, then you might be able to see like newer names or smaller names, or however you want to label it. I'm not trying to insult anyone, but I'm sure you'll see opportunities for those types of people to work some of the smaller events, or maybe some of the qualifiers to events or something like that. Yeah, sure, maybe there will be some of that, but as far as like people thinking that the talent situation is going to change a lot with like Moses stepping away and Henry G stepping away, I don't really see that happening. I mean, I'm sure Anders will eventually find a new partner to replace Moses, whether that's like the return of the Anders Similar duo or whether that's someone else. And I think that thing will kind of go back to normal, with Anders once he decides who his partner is going to be, or maybe he'll just work with a bunch of different people. Who knows? But I don't think that there's going to be that much room created for people to work their way up, because I'm sure that some of the other top talent that are already in place will just kind of slot to those new roles. So again, maybe Similar and Anders reconnect, and that means that nothing really changes on that front, right? Because things kind of just stay the same. Like Anders just gets a new duo partner. When it comes to someone like Henry G, Machine was kind of working with Henry G a lot lately, but now he's working with Pansy. I'm sure he'll work with other people. Maybe Sponge gets involved in commentary. Who really knows? The point is that there's already still like a totem pole established in a long list of commentators and analysts there, that just because two people left doesn't mean that the whole system's going to get rattled. I think that Harry and Hugo are establishing themselves. Scrawny and Launders are getting back together, which is great to see. And they've obviously established themselves over the last couple of years. Machine will get a new partner. Anders will get a new partner. And I think things will pretty much remain the same. Like I haven't really seen an increased opportunity for myself personally, or for any of the other people that I know that aren't working regularly. Like it seems like it's still the same group of people. Which, I'm not trying to, whine about it or something like that. That's just the facts, right? Like, I'm still struggling to get work, and a lot of people that were struggling to get work are still struggling. It's not like our chances have increased. It's just maybe there's going to be a little bit of pivoting amongst the tier 1 talent group. And that's really about it. So on that front, I don't think really as much is going to change people think, unless more people leave, which I haven't heard any indication that's going to be the case. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Speaking of you and, of course, Vince, your duo partner there, have you guys been enjoying the fact that sometimes you will be able to grab the Go TVs and just do a stream like in a sense where he's essentially got it on his own stream and you guys are just doing it out that way? Has that been something that's been more on the news side? I mean, obviously Go TVs existed before, but in this kind of environment, it almost feels like the value of B streams or the value of side streams where they're not the mainstream of the broadcast has gone up just because of the fact that we're seeing so many of the same broadcast talent on the mainstreams, and you basically have the same 3, 4, however many voices on those mainstreams bringing you the commentary. Regardless of whether or not they do a TriCast to try to attenuate that, there's only so much you can do with the same cast of characters across 18 hours of games or however long it is. So has that been an opportunity that you've been able to capitalize on, obviously independent of working for a mainstay company? What's your take on that?
I mean, I guess it's fun, it's obviously fun to cast with Vince or just cast in general. But I mean, all that stuff that you're seeing, we're not getting paid to do that. That's just us doing it on our own time for fun. And, for Vince to have content for his channel, because he tries to stream a pretty good bit on Twitch now. So for him, it's content for his channel, and it brings more people to his doorstep, so to speak, and maybe gets him more people recognizing who he is and following him, and helping building up his individual brand. And it helps me too when I do work with him occasionally to also get my name out there to some people who maybe haven't seen me or heard me cast before, or whatever the case may be. So in that sense, yeah, it provides some exposure, yeah, it provides some brand building, but no one's getting a paycheck from that. So it doesn't really increase our work opportunities. So in a sense, yeah, it's fun, but at the end of the day, it doesn't get the bills paid. And honestly, man, like I have a pretty pessimistic view about that whole thing, because no one's knocking on my door asking me to do any CSGO events like for actual paid gigs. No one seems to want to support Vince and I working together. They would rather just Vince work with other people. So that's a nightmare, in my opinion. Like that's something I've really been struggling with mentally over these last few months, thinking that maybe my chances would increase, and really they've just gone down. Like I haven't done an actual paid CSGO gig in like 4 months or something like that. And I have no indication that there's anything on the horizon in the CSGO space for me. So, that is that's kind of a dark mark for me right now. That's a sensitive topic, I guess you could say, but I don't mind talking about it. But the reality is there's so much uncertainty, as there always has been as a freelancer in this space, that isn't like one of the established names. And again, I'm not trying to like whine about it. Those established names have earned their status. They have,
Right.
done great work when they've been given opportunities, and they've capitalized, on those opportunities, and they've been very successful, and they deserve all the success that they've got. But it does suck that I feel like I've never really gotten a fair shake. I don't think Vince and I have never been given the chance to work together consistently, ever. And so we've never gotten a chance to prove ourselves, essentially. And it's that catch-22 of, well, you need to be established for us to give you a chance. But in order for yourself to get established, you need to get chances. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I'm eternally stuck in that catch-22 situation. So especially Vince and I as an item is stuck in that situation where we've only gotten to cast a gig here or there over the last couple of years. We're confident in each other, and we know that we could bring a good product if we're given the chances, but we just haven't been. And that's what I was trying to say earlier. Like, I don't think the talent scene is really going to change all that much because 2 people left. I think a couple people will maybe pivot a bit, but all in all, I think it'll mostly remain the same. And again, I'm not knocking the talent that is out there because they've earned their place, but it still kind of hurts for, me and others kind of in a similar, position to me, just not really getting that chance to ever really get consistent and prove what they're capable of. So yeah, that's a tough one for me.
Has that been something that's been on the back of your mind as far as seeing Valorant come up in the background? Because obviously they've got a lot more on the spectrum of tournaments that are being run by a bunch of organizers that maybe people have never even heard of before. So there is no preconceived notions. There's nothing that says, oh, I already know, like I've already like slotted these 2 people in to this role or that duo or that component. Has that been something where you've been looking to potentially pivot towards, or is that something you would rather just stick with CS because your heart's in this game more than that? What do you think about that?
I mean, in an ideal world, I would do both, right? In an ideal world, I would continue to work in CSGO because I love this game and I feel like I could still bring a lot of value to a broadcast in CSGO. But yeah, certainly I would like to dabble in Valorant and then just kind of see how it goes. I've done 1 gig so far in Valorant. It's kind of a smaller event, like just a couple of weeks ago before the recording of this video, actually. And I'm not sure if I'll get any more opportunities or not. It's one of those things where when it's a new game like Valorant, unless you know people in the space, it's hard to break in because the people who get there first, kind of want to just guard everything for, you know what I mean?
Right.
Sometimes you just don't know people in the space. And so you can like reach out to people like direct messages or emails or what have you and be like, hey, I'm interested in casting your event. Here's a demo reel of me casting Counter-Strike. Would you be interested in working with me? I mean, you can try to be proactive and reach out to people and try to establish, connections and try to network a bit and try to like put a demo reel out there and such. But honestly, with Valorant, so far it is kind of the same group of people doing most of the top events. Usually it's actually like that CSA talent agency is usually the one that's getting reached out to by a lot of these TOs, and they just kind of hire the group that are represented by CSA, and that's kind of the talent for the event. And again, a lot of those guys are really fantastic at what they do, like Golden Boy, Puckett, all these different guys. And there are some kind of homegrown names, like people like Simo and Doug and some of these other guys, Ryan Central, who like kind of started out in Valorant very early and just kind of, did good work, and now they're continuing to get hired. So there's like there is some homegrown talent, so to speak, in Valorant, but a lot of the main talent in Valorant for like the bigger events are just like big names from other games that have like dabbled in Valorant, that have like massive brands behind them and have a talent agency behind them, kind of working for them to get them gigs and stuff like that. So, Valorant's certainly a game I'd be interested in working more in. Vince has indicated to me that he's also interested. So if we could duo in Valorant, we would definitely do it. I'm definitely trying to reach out to people and get us a gig, get us a chance to show people what we are capable of in Valorant. Like I said, I've done 1 gig in Valorant. Maybe I'll get more, maybe I won't. Again, it's the same story, right? Like you can be proactive, you can reach out to people, you can try, but at the end of the day, you have to hope that someone will give you a chance. And then you have to, if you do get it, you have to capitalize on it as best you can. And I am fortunate that someone did give me a chance with at least 1 event in Valorant so far. Huge shout out to Van Silly and the people over at Northern Arena and Pulse who gave me a shot. But I don't know if that'll lead to consistent work in Valorant or if that was just kind of like a one-time thing, who knows? But certainly in an ideal world, like I said, I would do both. But if it got to a point where I was getting 0 opportunity in CSGO and Valorant was offering me a bunch, then at that point, it would be kind of a no-brainer to just focus on Valorant at that point, right? Like, you can want and desire something, but if you're never given the opportunity to do it, then you kind of have to walk away at some point. And I don't want to walk away from CSGO, but unfortunately, it seems like I'm not really going to have much of a choice unless things change at some point soon. I think I'm capable. I think I've only gotten better over the last couple of years in particular. I think I'm more confident than I've ever been. Like I used to be really lacking confidence and really just like low self-esteem. But I feel like I finally have that confidence now, and I've worked on a lot of my shortcomings, I feel like, but no one will ever know unless I actually get the chance to prove it to people. And unfortunately, I've not been given that chance really.
One of the last things that I wanted to ask you about here was related to the sort of, it almost came out by circumstance on the HLTV Confirmed podcast, but you did mention it earlier that on that talk show, they have a mention of already confirmed cases of, it wasn't match fixing, it was the ghosting and the stream sniping and stuff. And as far as I understand, this is actually pertaining to pro play. I mean, it's obviously not the same thing if you're just streaming and then, you're streaming your FPL games or something. This is at a pro level where, the ramifications are obviously professional outcomes. So do you think that with the coaching ban in mind, obviously we've hit that on the head a couple times on this particular interview, with the fact that there's now so much in question about online play, is this going to result in even more individuals or an extension of existing individuals who are offenders across multiple spectrums? They've done coaching bug and they've also done the stream sniping thing. Do you think that there's any sort of result that can come out of this that won't be even more of a sort of a, again, drama is too reductionist of a take, but a scandal? Is there something out here that I'm missing, or is it just that the online era has resulted in the opportunity for so much more in terms of interference and bug abuse and malfeasance on the part of competitors? What's your take on the overall thing now that we can start to piece it all together and see all of the different elements in play?
So the first thing I have to wonder about this whole, ghosting and stream sniping thing is, how the fuck is it even possible? Like, if you are a competent tournament organizer / broadcaster, you should have delays implemented properly that should totally prevent any type of ghosting or stream sniping taking place. Now, I get that even if you have like a bigger delay on, that people can still like maybe get a read on the other team's economy, or like maybe get a read on like what strat they just used. And so you can like, maybe there is some benefit even with like a huge delay on ghosting and stream sniping. But I mean, I feel like if there's a proper delay in place, there should be a very limited impact that ghosting or stream sniping would get you. So I do wonder about that. Like, how is it even possible that people are ghosting or stream sniping? Like, is it another bug? I'm not really sure how that would really come into play. Second of all, there's no mercy on this one, right? It's not a bug. If you stream sniped it or ghosted, you intentionally did something horrible, and like there's gonna be no mercy for you, or no, there's no gray area on this one. I feel like it's pretty clear cut that if you ghosted or stream sniped, that you did something horribly wrong. You're not gonna be able to explain your way out of it. So I think that the punishments will probably be a little bit harsher. I think the reputations will be a lot more hit by this compared to the coaching bug that is a little bit more nuanced in some situations. And I also want to know, how do they know? Like, how do you have definitive proof? Like, how can you have busted someone on stream sniping or ghosting? Like, did you somehow see them on camera looking at a stream or something? Like, I guess that's possible, right? Like, if a coach cam popped up on a broadcast and you could see the coach was staring at a monitor that had a Twitch stream running or something, then maybe you could use that as evidence. Like, I'm not really sure what evidence you would have to actually be able to bust someone on ghosting or stream sniping. I'm curious to know. Right. Like, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not questioning it. I'm just curious, like, as a third party observer, like, I wonder how they did that. And I wonder, what benefit was actually gained from it, and how severe the punishment will be. Like, it's too early, I guess. Like, I kind of want to hear more information about it before I had a strong opinion, but it'll be interesting. Like, definitely it's going to cause a lot more of a stir. I think it'll even be worse than the coaching bug, because it's not even a bug. It's just people being nefarious. So yeah, that's going to be a fun roller coaster ride whenever we get more information from that. But yeah, I'm more curious than anything on that one, because I feel like that would be a little bit harder to get evidence for. I think it'd be a little bit harder to prove. And I think it would be honestly harder to commit that type of act and actually gain real benefit from it. So that one, there's too many question marks for me to comment too heavily on that one. I have to get more information.
One of the other things that came out, as not through that podcast, but just in general down the grapevine, was that ESIC is apparently going to be investigating match fixing at a lower tier level. I believe it was specifically regarding the MDL stuff. And apparently this has inadvertently or maybe directly resulted in a few Valorant pros who were ex-CSGO pros being removed from their rosters. I'm not personally, completely savvy on this particular topic because I was only tangentially aware of the fact that ESIC was investigating it. I had only recently found out that there was actually disciplinary action taken by teams. Do you think that there's some sort of precedent here for an ESIC investigation to result in a different game's player base being affected? Or is this sort of like something where they're just saving face, or they're doing it from a moral standpoint as opposed to a sort of legal or game rule standpoint?
Yeah, this is a tough topic for me because I feel like I've gone back and forth on this in my own, thought exercise on how I believe this situation should be handled. Obviously they should be banned from Counter-Strike, right? So if you threw games in the Mountain Dew League, you should get some type of term limit ban from CSGO. And unfortunately, the precedent from Valve is that it's permanent. So I guess Valve would have no choice but to be consistent and do the same thing, but I'm not really sure how that will play out, because I do think it's draconian to permanently ban someone from the game for match fixing. I think that multiple year bans make total sense, but I think permanent bans, as we saw with the whole swag days, ACK situation, the Alba Power moment, I think is overkill. So that's one side of it. At bare minimum, they're going to get banned from Counter-Strike. So if they ever wanted to return to Counter-Strike, if they didn't like Valorant or things didn't work out there and they wanted to come back to Counter-Strike at some point, they wouldn't be able to. I think that's the bare minimum, and that's probably is what's going to happen. Now, as far as the idea of you got banned in Counter-Strike, so we should also ban you from Valorant, I would hope that Riot does not take that approach. Now, if you're a team, then you just kick that player anyway because you don't want that negative reputation associated with your brand. So I think that it'll work itself out without Riot needing to bar the players from competing, in their game. I don't think Riot needs to do anything. I think that the team organizations will take care of that on their own. There's no benefit if you're an org to keep a player like that on your roster. Unless somehow, some way you can prove it was a one-time instance, and so you're going to suspend them for a certain period of time, maybe fine them their salary. Maybe there's certain nuanced situations where you can be okay, we're not going to get rid of this guy completely, but based on the evidence, we are going to give him a set punishment of a fine and, a suspension or whatever the case may be. Maybe there will be some situations like that, but I just think I think you put yourself in real murky waters if you start saying we can have cross bans between games, because there'll be really no precedent for that. Look at traditional sports. If you get barred from one sport, you don't get barred from another sport. So I don't see why esports should be any different, really. And I think that if you think about that, if you do that, listen, everyone's all excited that all these T1 players get another chance at esports again, like ACK, Swag, all those guys, right? Well, guess what? If you say that all these MDL players that match fixed in CSGO are now banned from Valorant forever or whatever, well, now you have to go ban those guys too. And Steel just crossed over to Valorant for 100 Thieves, and a lot of people are really excited about that. Well, guess what? Logic follows. If you're going to make a ban follow a player from Counter-Strike to Valorant, then you have to do it across the board. Is that what you really want? I don't think so. So I would hope that, from a moral perspective, I think those players deserve to get punished. And there is a part of me that is shit, they basically get to dodge a ban, just go play Valorant. And it's they don't truly get punished because they switch games anyway. And so they don't give a fuck that they got banned from Counter-Strike. Yeah, part of me morally is man, that's shit. That's shitty. But when you take a step back from that and you think about all the repercussions and all the shitstorms you could create, and you think about it a little bit more logically, I think you have to come to the conclusion that banning cross games probably isn't the right way to go. And even if you're upset about that, understand that it will get policed by the teams themselves, because they probably won't want to touch a player that has that on their record. Whether that be permanently, they'll never want to touch that player and that player is always going to struggle to find a team to play for, or if it's more of a suspension, they get fined, whatever the case may be, by their org if they're already signed to one. They'll still receive some type of punishment, whether that be to their reputation or whether that actually be a team handing them something. That's what I hope would happen. I think I'm still not 100% set on my, I'm still kind of thinking through it and still kind of assessing it. I'm not firm on that stance, but I do think that you potentially open up a can of worms you don't want to if you start saying that we have to ban players across all esports titles, right? Because that the logic would follow then, right? So does this mean that this player cannot compete in any esport? None. Like their whole esports career is over now permanently. They can never compete in any game ever again. Like that isn't that rather draconian, right? I mean, especially if it's like a younger guy who only did it like one time. Like where do you draw the line, right? I think it gets really, really murky. So yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that that's how I feel about it. But maybe my opinion will change as more evidence comes to light.
Realistically speaking, I don't think it would make sense for Riot to do that anyway, because they are much more responsive to PR backlash than Valve historically has been. And you already have fans of Steel, fans of ESIC, fans of Swag, who would really go apeshit if they got, you know, enforced bans over from one game to another, and they were permanently disbarred in that particular context. I think that Riot would have to walk that back if they ever even entertained it in the first place, just because of the fact that, you know, those players have a certain amount of public sway, and you would lose out on a lot of fans in that particular respect. So even the tough part is, like you say, they do get to in effect dodge something that they very recently did, but you also don't want to hold them accountable forever, because as much as we may hold their actions in distaste now, I mean, we did the same thing when the, you know, iBuyPower bans came through. And I don't think anybody at that point, regardless of hyperbole, I don't think that anybody truly felt that they should be permanently disbarred even back then when it happened, let alone many years down the line. So
it'll be interesting because, like, from a PR perspective for Riot, I feel like a lot of the community would demand that those players get banned. So I think that they would be put in a really dicey situation where it's like, damn if they do, damn if they don't, because they're either going to piss off a large percentage of the community by not banning those players who want to see them banned, and then they might piss off another huge group of people if they decide not to or to do it. So I think that's going to be a PR nightmare no matter what. But I think that long term it makes more sense to as Riot be like, look, teams can do whatever they want. Like if they want to sign these players or they don't want to sign these players, that's on them and on, you know, whether or not they want to take that reputation hit or whether or not they want to have to deal with this mess. But from our perspective as Riot, we're not Counter-Strike. So we're not going to punish people for what they did in another game that we have no control over or no like oversight over. Maybe it would be different if you had a player banned in one game and then they tried to play another game that was made by the same developer. Maybe at that point you could make an argument for like a cross ban. Like I know this would never happen, but let's say like someone cheated in LCS, then they wanted to go play in the Valorant version of LCS. Maybe then you could see a cross game ban because it's the same developer and the same like league system or something like that. But when it becomes like different developers and different groups, I don't know. Like that just seems really odd to me. I don't know. Like I don't know how that works in traditional sports. Like if you get banned in the MLB, can you not go play in the NBA? No one's really tried it, right? Like Michael Jordan's like the only person I can really think of who like went from basketball to professional baseball and then back to basketball. But obviously he didn't do anything wrong, so never really had to worry about like an actual ban. But yeah, I'm just not sure about that. I think that's that. I think that you open up a huge can of worms if you start arguing that if you get punished in one game, then you can never compete in any other game. Especially depending on like the age of the player, like with the whole situation with Yampi right now and CSGO with, you know, him being like 14 years old or even younger than that, and having a VAC ban, and now all of a sudden he's permanently banned from competing in majors. Like, what the fuck is that? Right. So, I mean, I don't know, man. I think that like we've both been kind of indicating, it does suck that these players might just like get a freebie on doing something horribly wrong in Counter-Strike and then just skating over the Valorant and kind of basically dodging punishment for their actions. That does suck. Like that feels bad in your gut. Like you don't want to see that happen. But at the other end, I think that there's too many negatives that would come with doing cross game bans.
Well, as we close out the interview, do you have any final words for us? Any sort of lingering topics on your mind or things you want to leave us with?
No, I mean, it's been a great conversation. I appreciate you having me on. I think we covered a lot, we talked about a lot of cool topics, and it's always fun talking esports, talking Counter-Strike, and Valorant's a new interest. So fun talking about that a little bit as well. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Pleasure.